Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 28th of January. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily by calling us on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you can't find what you're looking for, I encourage you to email me, and I'll help direct you as best I possibly can. It's my pleasure to serve you at david.snyder@noaa.gov. Here's a way we see our hazards, warnings, watches, and advisories across Alaska tonight. We're going to start in the south and work all the way around, move north, and then head out to the west coast. So I promise I'll try not to forget any one spot. Let's start in the south. A high wind warning is in effect for the central and southern parts of southeast tonight as a powerful area of low pressure is working into the Gulf. It's going to stay here for the next 24 to 36 hours and then hover across the Kenai Peninsula. So that has a lot of impacts. So we're going to start with the high wind here. Looks like those strong southeasterly winds will come up 25 to 35 miles per hour with gusts to 60 miles per hour. That could last from tonight all the way until about 3 o'clock on Wednesday morning there. So some strong and powerful winds coming through. I want to tell you, too, that after this storm passes, we're going to have another wave of winds developing, probably Thursday into Friday, or maybe even as early as late Wednesday night. So one wave now, that's what we're warning about. There's another wave behind that. You'll hear more about that in the next day or so, but be prepared for a second wave as we go through the week. A look up north shows a winter storm warning still in effect for the Haines and Skagway areas, as well as the Klondike Highway and White Pass. It looks like we could see a total of 6 to 14 inches of snow in general in the region and gusts to 45 miles per hour. Of course, that blowing snow means visibility is going to be down and travel conditions will not be good at all. So keep that in mind, and especially with the recent avalanche danger there in the Klondike Highway and White Pass area. So travel concerns there for northern parts of southeast, as well as just the trouble of more snow in your area. The Yakutat region looking at a winter weather advisory through this evening. It could be done by the time you're watching the show here at 6 o'clock or so. It looks like that will be winding down. So good news there. Maybe some slight improvements in the weather for the time being around Yakutat from Cape Fairweather to Cape Suckling. As we move a little bit further west into Prince William Sound, a blizzard warning is in effect there for Thompson Pass. No surprise with the wind moving through the region. It does look like you could see 2 to 4 inches of snow and gusts to 60 miles per hour through the period. It looks like things may improve a little bit by noon on Wednesday there. So a blizzard warning for Thompson Pass right now, and a winter storm watch, likely, well, let's say likely, certainly could push toward a blizzard for the Turnagain Pass area, Portage Valley, and maybe getting closer to the Whittier region. But it does look like as this weather system is moving your way, that blowing snow after heavy snow may be possible there from the Turnagain Pass to Portage Valley area and pushing northward into the highway corridor there. So it looks like we're waiting to see this develop, but right now it looks like the potential is certainly growing in that regard. Kodiak Island, you are under a blizzard warning right now. It looks like 8 to 16 inches of snowfall possible for your area. That'll take you from tonight until 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Looks like gusts there could reach up to 45 miles per hour. So initially, the first wave of snow may be generally light, but it should pick up very quickly this evening. So a blizzard warning now in effect for Kodiak and the Kodiak Island area. Let's move northward. We're talking about the yellow shaded areas now for all of the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range out toward the Seward Peninsula and the west coast, as well as areas around the Denali and Healy region, Denali National Park, Tanana Valley, and the Eastern Alaska Range. Wind chill advisories are what these yellow colors mean for you. And that means that the air could feel like it's 45 to 50 degrees below zero when you're talking about the temperature and the wind effects on your skin combined. So be extra careful if you're out in these areas. The red shaded colors for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast and the north-facing slopes of the eastern Brooks Range mean you are under a wind chill warning at this point. And in those areas, we're talking about chill values that could feel as cold as 60 to 70 below for Kaktovik and southward. into areas around Anwar and maybe just north of Arctic Village. So again, be extra careful, and if you don't have to travel in those areas, that would be very wise at this point. Out across the YK Delta into Bristol Bay, wind chill advisories are in effect for those areas. No change from what we've been talking about for the last couple of days. That also includes St. Lawrence Island and Macoriac, Nunivak Island there. So again, wind chill values could reach as cold as 40 to 50 below. A lot of weather going on. A lot of it has to do with this low pressure system across the Gulf. You can see it quickly moving northward, dropping to below 960 millibars this afternoon and going lower before it starts to fill in. The outer bands of the clouds just reaching into Kodiak and Prince William Sound today, and certainly overtaking a large part of southeastern Alaska. Seriously cold, cold high pressure sitting across the Northland and across the Arctic coast. That is not going to move, but it will add more wind to the western parts of Alaska as this continues driving northward tonight. As you can see out in the west, plenty of low clouds working across the central and western chain. And once again, as I pointed out yesterday, you can see that frayed but growing ice edge here all the way into Bristol Bay. It is now reaching around St. Matthew, not yet to St. Paul. We'll have an ice update for you with Eric Holloway coming up here in just a few minutes. But the main feature on the map, of course, is this very strong and strengthening area of low pressure with another wave coming in hot behind it. At 955 millibars this afternoon, you can see that powerful wave of low pressure working its way into southeast with rain and snow wrapping around that, some of that reaching into Kodiak Island this afternoon. Pretty sporadic areas of light snow generally across the interior and the west, and areas of light snow across the Alaska Peninsula from Cold Bay to Falls Pass to Unalaska and all the way out toward Adak and Atka, including St. Paul. By tonight, low pressure will drop to 956 millibars and hover very close to western Prince William Sound and the Kenai Fjords of the Kenai Peninsula itself and near Kodiak Island. This should put Kodiak Island in prime position for heavy snow, especially this evening, and some very strong winds at times. And again, that poor visibility, the falling snow, and the wind, all a factor in calling it a true blizzard. Across southeast, you can see rain and then rain and snow across northern parts of the Panhandle. It looks like Yakutat may warm up a little bit, removing the threat for heavier snow for your area this evening. Wind moving across parts of the Glen Highway as well as areas in the eastern Alaska Range make it a pretty good likelihood that we'll see some blowing snow in the region as well as very cold temperatures with that wind chill value there. Areas of fog and low clouds expected across the North Slope and blowing snow for the west. As we get into Wednesday, high pressure continues across the Chukchi Coast at 1,017 millibars. Watch for periods of heavy snow continuing across the northern parts of southeast. Another wave of low pressure starting to appear here on the southern end of the map. And then our current area of low pressure hovering close to the Kenai Peninsula sits at 962 millibars. This will keep poor visibility and wind going around the Portage Valley, Turnagain Pass, and probably western sections of Prince William Sound. Snow will fly across areas of the Chugach all the way down toward Kodiak Island and the Bristol Bay region. Blowing snow is expected across the west, and poor visibility across the north is possible. As we get into your Thursday, low pressure begins to pull away from the mainland there. We'll have another wave of low pressure working up southeast. That means more wind for your area. And snow showers continue on the north and western side with a decent flow of northerly winds coming in behind this. That keeps that cold moving into western Alaska, with rain moving into the central and western chain as a slight warm-up develops there. A quick look at temperatures. 30s for southeast tonight. Temperatures anywhere from 0 to 10 below around south central and Cook Inlet, 11 above in Kodiak, 21 around Cordova. Temperatures in the interior, 25 to 30 below in the North Slope, anywhere from 15 to 30 below. Bethel looking at 22 below, and high temperatures there nearly 15 below tomorrow, 20 below in Fairbanks.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Taking a look at the aviation weather, flying weather for Wednesday morning, looking at IFR conditions over much of southeast and into the northern Gulf and eastern Kenai Peninsula and through Kodiak Island, with this low pressure system moving into the Gulf. Otherwise, marginal conditions out along the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians, and also marginal conditions eastern interior and North Slope. With that weakening system on Wednesday afternoon, continued IFR conditions over large portion of the North Gulf and into eastern Kenai Peninsula and down through Kodiak Island, marginal conditions and IFR conditions there as well across the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise scattered to isolated IFR to conditions along the eastern interior and north slope. Thursday morning, looking at reinforcements here with another low moving into southeast Alaska with IFR conditions over the southern and central panhandle. Otherwise, marginal conditions over much of the south central region and down through the Alaska Peninsula. Also IFR conditions, widespread area over the eastern interior and up through the north slope. And for Thursday afternoon, drastically improving conditions there over the southeast, with marginal conditions continuing with isolated IFR conditions over eastern Kenai Peninsula and through portions of Kodiak Island and down through the Alaska Peninsula. Large area of IFR conditions through the eastern interior and up through the north slope. The past conditions for the Brooks Range, Anaktuva, VFR are otherwise marginal as you head out into the north slope. And add again VFR, but marginal conditions as you again head out on the north slope there. Alaska Range passes, Lake Clark and Merrill went for marginal, but improving the VFR conditions later in the day. Rainy Pass, much the same, but marginal conditions as you get into the Tanana Basin. Same for Windy, Isabel, and Mentasta, marginal conditions over the entire region there. And Tanita VFR conditions. Portage IFR with that low moving into the Gulf. And for Chilkoot, Southeast Pass, Chilkoot and White, we're going to be IFR early, but improving the VFR conditions. Freezing levels for Wednesday morning, elevated freezing levels through portions of the southeast with up to 2,000 foot there. Otherwise surface across much of the southeast coastal mountains, but otherwise coming across the North Gulf and down through the Pacific, and then coming back up through the eastern Aleutians or central Aleutians. Icing for Wednesday looking between 3,000 and 5,000 feet there over portions, a large portion of the southeast into the northern Gulf and eastern Kenai. Jet stream, we're going to be looking at 175 knots coming across the Pacific there, 145 knots as it get into the Canada, and 50 knots winds as you get into the North Gulf Coast there, and 55 knots as you come down through the Bering Strait. 9,000 foot winds for Wednesday, low pressure system slightly moving westward. Weak conditions through much of the interior, otherwise 20 and 30 knots winds through the west slope and 40 knots as you get down to the Bering Sea. Pretty weak conditions as you get farther into the Bering. But otherwise, southeast is going to see pretty strong winds there with 40s up to 70 knots down in that region. 3,000 foot winds for Wednesday. Again, low pressure system here. Otherwise, 40 knot winds through coming from the east through much of the eastern interior. 40 and 50 knot winds through the west slope. Again, weak conditions as you head out into the Bering. How does this all spell out in turbulence on Wednesday? We're going to be looking at isolated to considerable moderate portions of the Brooks Range with isolated severe there. And otherwise, the Seward Peninsula below 2,000 foot, and that extends all the way down through the western portions of the mainland. And below 3,000 foot along a large portion of the Alaska Peninsula and into the eastern Aleutians, and up through much of the Gulf region with below 4,000 feet there and across southeast Alaska. Also below 2,000 feet there on St. Lawrence Island.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the earth and grows our food. While the sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane, about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button, it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button, it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine forecast. Let's take a look at the sea ice analysis today. You can see the pack ice is closed in around St. Matthew Island there, and we're also expecting some further concentrations there to close in Bristol Bay. Otherwise, during the week, this is closed in roughly 20 nautical miles. We also see here in Shelkoff Strait a little bit of a sea ice poking out there, but otherwise continued ice growth in the Cook Inlet. Wednesday's marine forecast for southeast. For the inside waters, winds generally from the south, 35 knots, producing gales there. Outside waters, winds generally from the southwest at 45 knots, near storm force winds there. Otherwise, on the north side of there, winds generally from the south at 35 knots. For Thursday, inside waters ranging between 35 and 55 knots. Otherwise, gusting to 50 there in Lint Canal. Outside waters, storm force winds out there, 50 to 55 knots, a gust to 70 and 65 knots in the southern part of that. Otherwise, in the northern and central part of that basin, winds generally from the southwest at 35 knots. For south central, good sea heights out there in the North Gulf with 27 footers. Otherwise, winds generally from the south at 40 knots. Prince William Sound from the northeast, 25 knots. Otherwise, winds generally from the northeast through here with 40-knot winds, seas as high as 22 feet. Cook Inlet, winds generally from the northeast at 20 to 35 knots. On the south side of the Cook Inlet, we're near Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands. Storm force winds there, seas as high as 19 feet. For Thursday, Prince William Sound, northeast at 15. Otherwise, from the south out there near the Gulf, North Gulf with 20 knots. Otherwise, rest of the Gulf region, winds generally from the southeast at 20 knots. And then through Cook Inlet, winds generally from the north at 10 knots. But as you get into the southern part of the Cook Inlet, winds from the west at 35 knots, seas as high as 12 feet. Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Wednesday, near Kodiak Island, winds generally from the northwest at 40 knots, seas as high as 19 feet out here. But otherwise, on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds from the northeast at 35 knots. Gales out here on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds from the north at 40 knots. Bristol Bay north at 25. Again, around Kodiak Island, winds from northwest at 25 to 35 in this area. Gales in this region just south of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, gales out for the north and south side of the Alaska Peninsula, seas as high as 14 feet. Bristol Bay, winds from the northwest at 30 knots. Aleutian chain, looking at winds generally from the north across central and eastern part of Aleutians, 25 to 40 knots. Otherwise, on the western side of that, winds generally from the west or north at 20 knots. And for Thursday, winds generally from the east and the central and eastern part with winds generally from the 20 to 35 knot range, seas as high as 12 feet down that way, and out in the western part, winds generally from the southwest at 25 knots. West Coast, Wednesday, looking at winds generally from the north, 25 knots as you get near the edge of the pack ice. Winds generally from the north at 35 to 40 gales in there. And for Thursday, again, northerly winds north to northeast, 20 to 25 knots there. Otherwise, near the pack ice, northerly at 20 knots. For the Arctic coast, Beaufort Sea, winds generally from the north at 10 knots. Ukqiavik just offshore, north at 10. Otherwise, northwest and down through the Bering Strait, winds generally from the 10 to 25 knot range. And again, Arctic coast on Thursday, looking from the winds from the northeast at 10 to 15. Otherwise, down through the northwest and through the Bering Strait, 5 to 25 knots out of the north. And for tonight's weather, looking at a nice low pressure system there near Prince William Sound with scattered rain showers moving into southeast, continued snow showers in the northeast part of the Panhandle. Otherwise, snow showers down the backside and into the Alaska Peninsula. And for Wednesday's weather, continued weakening of that low pressure system. Otherwise, mixed precipitation down through the Panhandle, snow showers through much of South Central.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.